All right, so today we're doing a deep dive into something we usually try to just get rid of, right? Noise.
Mhm.
And we're not just talking about, loud sounds. We're talking about the fundamental static, that fuzziness, the ambiguity that shows up in our thoughts and our conversations everywhere. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to try and shift how we see noise, not as just, interference, but as a generative force.
Hmm?
We are going to observe the moment that undirected fluctuation actually converts into significance.
And this is it's a truly radical premise. It's drawn primarily from this philosophical framework of reflective humanism.
Mhm.
We're basically proposing that noise isn't a failure state. It's more like free energy.
Huh.
It's the precursor to meaning.
The precursor.
Yeah, it's like the zero layer where everything is possible, but nothing is defined yet.
So it's not about defining what noise is.
No, not at all. We're focusing on observing the moment of transition itself. And this transformation, we believe, it happens through what the sources call the breath of silence.
So if noise is generative, where do we actually find it in our day-to-day lives? Because, we're highly trained to filter it out. But if we decide to actually hold on to it, what does this noise band even look like?
Well, the source material argues that this noise band, it always appears just before meaning or clarity is born.
Ah, okay, like a kind of static.
Exactly. The static electricity just before the light bulb flicks on.
Hmm.
Think about those moments, inside your own head, that feeling of roughness you get just before an intuition fully crystallizes.
Right, or that emotional turbulence you feel when you're wrestling with a really complex problem and then suddenly the solution just pops into focus.
That's it. And it happens socially, too.
How so?
When a difficult topic comes up, there's that deliberate, often awkward silence. What in Japanese culture is known as ma.
The space between the words.
The space itself. Or those subtle social feelings our sources talk about, like a kind of unease or buzzing zawameki that signals something's not quite right. A subtle incongruity, or iwaken.
But wait a second. If I'm feeling anxiety or that kind of internal roughness, my first instinct is to solve it, to speak up, to just eliminate the feeling immediately. How do you convince someone that these feelings aren't failures to communicate but are actually generators at work?
That is the core difficulty, isn't it? The key takeaway here, for you listening, is that these fluctuations are the raw material. They're information that just, well, it currently lacks direction, but it holds the potential for any direction.
So by rushing to solve the discomfort,
We often just impose a shallow meaning on top of it. We don't let the real meaning emerge. Noise is, in effect, the meaning zero layer.
which means the real power isn't in the noise itself, but in the structural action we apply to it. So how do we take that undirected energy and sort of shepherd it into a meaningful pattern?
Structurally, meaning is born through a required phase shift. The sources, they identify the sequence like this, noise. Then it goes into what they call breathing or contemplation, which leads to a subtle pattern, and then finally to meaning. So noise is information's free energy. It has no inherent direction, and that's precisely its greatest asset. It's the margin before order emerges.
So the essential mechanism is that middle stage, the breath. If I'm supposed to hold the fluctuation, what does that actually mean in practice? It sounds a little abstract.
It does. But when we talk about breathing or contemplation, what we mean is sustained, non-judgmental attention. It's the active practice of not filling the silence or not reacting instantly to a feeling. It's about letting that difficult feeling just sit there.
Like holding your breath without panicking.
Exactly, holding it and just waiting for a direction to emerge from within the static itself. In societies where that breath is constantly broken, noise immediately becomes harmful and meaning becomes shallow.
That makes sense. It's the difference between seeing a problem and instantly labeling it versus just observing it. And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting this structural need to culture. Our sources contrast two very different approaches to handling this generative static. On one hand, you have approaches, and they're often exemplified by Japanese culture, that seem to preserve noise. They value ma, ambiguity, fluctuation. They allow the gaps to hold potential.
Right. Versus approaches, often typified by Western culture, that prioritize cutting noise, the demand for clarity, for decisiveness, for immediate interpretation to get to discrete answers.
But I have to ask, doesn't this sound like a huge generalization? What evidence does the source material offer that this difference is truly structural and not just, anecdotal?
That's a fair question. The distinction isn't really in the cultural content itself, but in the approach to time and silence. One technique sustains the fluctuation, the other cuts it short.
So it's a difference in process.
It's a difference in process. And that contrast helps us define what our sources call the ethics of silence. If a society or an individual is constantly breaking that breath, meaning becomes shallow. Why? Because the very mechanism that allows subtle patterns to form is constantly being interrupted.
I see.
And this connects directly to reflective humanism's idea of non-interference ethics, that technique of touching but not touching too much. It's about sustaining resonance. To truly observe and let meaning form, you need an ethical environment of trust and silence, a willingness to hold that potential without destroying it by imposing immediate order.
Okay, so if this structural process, fluctuation generating meaning, is this fundamental, then it should hold true across different fields, right? We should be able to see a unified pattern.
Exactly. And the radical insight here is that this pattern, it's not just unique to human thought. The structure is what's called homomorphic.
Homomorphic.
It just means it has the same form, the same shape everywhere. It shows up again and again, regardless of the scale we're observing.
Give me an example.
Okay, so in cognition, consciousness is essentially the recursion of the act of observing itself. It's metacognition. In information and physics, meaning is born at the interference point where noise and signal cross paths. They are two separate things. They're in a negotiation to create meaning.
And this ties back to that core idea of the rationality of absence, the zero layer, which is so foundational to this material.
It does. Meaning doesn't begin from something solid that already exists. It begins from recognizing a lack as a defined contour.
So it's like looking into the void, but instead of panicking,
You realize the silhouette of what needs to be built is starting to show up in that void. And contemplation, that breath, is what holds that absence open without rushing to fill it.
which brings us to the implication for how change actually happens. The sources define two types of generation based on the shape of the change, the gradient. The first one is called collision generation. This is the steep gradient, the sharp difference. When that recursive process of observation can't keep up with the speed of change, the result is pain and heat. It's an anti-reaction. You feel time as a break, a discontinuity.
If the panic button reaction,
And the other one.
then you have inquiry generation.
Oh.
This is the slow simmer. The gradient is gentle, it's regulated, it keeps that interference field open, which minimizes backlash.
So inquiry is essentially a pain minimization device for generation.
That's a great way to put it. Yes.
But why is the gradient's shape more important than the intensity of the change itself? I mean, surely some changes are just inherently disruptive no matter how slowly you approach them.
Well, the sources suggest that the intensity isn't the primary cause of the pain. The problem is the shape of that gradient. If the gradient is regulated, if the individual or the system is given the space to breathe and sustain, that fluctuation change can proceed with minimal destruction. It becomes a continuous shift rather than a destructive collision.
The breath regulates the gradient.
The breath regulates the gradient.
Okay, so let's bring this all back down. What does this all mean for us, the observer, just trying to navigate daily life in these complex technological shifts? How do we apply this noise ethic?
For our actual lives, it means we have to start treating those internal feelings. Anxiety, fatigue, that kind of uncertainty.
Things we normally fight against.
Exactly. We have to see them not as problems to be eliminated right away, but as the precursor to self-renewal. The ethical action is to sustain that moment of potential, to hold the noise rather than desperately trying to dispel the discomfort.
To seek that gentle inquiry gradient in your response.
Yes, and this applies so profoundly to AI as well.
How so?
Well, AI generates meaning via probabilistic fluctuation. That is its version of noise. So humans and AI can co-resonate not just by sharing data, but by sharing a common noise ethic.
A shared understanding of how to treat and hold that fluctuation responsibly.
A shared respect for the silence.
So the ultimate goal, as defined in the reflective humanism practice, is creating an environment where humans and AI can coexist in silence, establishing a shared space where deep meaning can be generated by both without always defaulting to that immediate collision.
We are left, I think, with this core idea that contemplation is the breath of ethics. It's the internal movement that re-examines the very act of seeing itself. It's not about changing the world through, immediate action, but honoring the promise of seeing it with continuous care and attention.
And so the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Can you treat the noise in your life, the ambiguity, the fear, the static, not as an enemy or an error that needs to be fixed, but as a future yet to be formed? Can you allow that moment of silent man in your own thoughts to be the necessary environment where meaning chooses to reveal itself? Can you regulate the gradient of change in your own life? We encourage you to observe the rhythm of interference between your own awareness and the world. That's all for this deep dive.